Everyone, welcome to Voices on Social Justice. Today's episode is on teaching in a time of crises. I thought very carefully on this episode and contemplated whether to use the term crises actually for today's conversations because I don't want to seem like an alarmist. The fact is that we are in a time of crises. Our nation is in an unstable situation with COVID-19, and to date, having lost over 200,000 lives to this virus. We here at Constellations, we're very sensitive to the devastation in our communities. On top of that, we have experienced racial injustices during a pandemic that have just been overwhelming in many ways. This year, we've also lost some civil rights icons. Lewis, C.T. Vivian, and more recently, the great Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And with such loss to our nation's leadership, we're paying close attention to this year's major election in which so much is at stake. Racial and gender equality, healthcare, the economy, all of which affects our education system directly. But fortunately, a silver lining of hope that I see that has emerged is in education. It's within the superpowers that teachers have. Against all odds, they've rolled their sleeves. They've put on their masks and capes and have decided to press forward to provide students the best opportunities they deserve. So today, I'm super excited to be joined by two extraordinary women. They are teachers, Ms. Lashon Myles from Atlanta Public Schools and Ms. Charity Freeman from Chicago Public Schools. And we want our listeners to benefit from their voices, to hear in real terms the challenges of their daily work. And I'm also looking forward to them sharing their wisdom and their triumphs with 3.8 million public school teachers across America. We need to help them with their struggles as well. Together, we're going to talk about all things being a teacher during a pandemic, especially in school systems that are as large as, Chicago Public Schools and Atlanta Public Schools. And CPS, Chicago Public Schools, is actually the third largest school system in the United States. And while Atlanta Public Schools is only a fraction of the size, the demographics are nearly the same. 85% or more students of color, and more than that, economically disadvantaged. And in terms of racial divides, Chicago and Atlanta are two of the most segregated cities in the country. So we're also going to dive into how current social justice movements, have been impacting the classroom, and how to keep yourself and your students motivated during these challenging times. And with that, Lashon and Charity, thank you so much for being here. We're so glad to have you both. And I want to kick off this conversation by asking each of you to introduce yourselves and share a little about your background in education and how you became interested in computer science. So, Lashon, could you start us off with that?
Absolutely, no problem. Well, my name is Lashon Myles. I teach in Atlanta Public Schools at North Atlanta. I primarily am a math teacher, everything from Algebra 1 up to and through trig or pre-cal. I venture not into calculus world. That's a whole different animal and bird that I choose not to deal with. But of course, I also teach computer science, specifically AP Computer Science Principles and AP Computer Science A. I began my teaching career in New Orleans, Louisiana at Sarah T. Reed High School in 2001. We came back to Atlanta. I came to Atlanta in 2005, partially as a result of Hurricane Katrina and partially because we knew it was time to kind of move. and I've been teaching in Atlanta Public Schools since 2007. Um, I think I answered everything, or do you want a little bit more?
No, that was perfect. Thank you.
Awesome. Awesome.
How about you, Charity?
Yes, my name is Charity Freeman. I teach computer science with the Chicago Public School District at actually the largest of the Chicago Public Schools, Lane Tech College Prep High School. We currently do not have a mascot, otherwise I would shout us out, but we have just removed our Indians as our mascot, and so we're looking to find a more appropriate and a more culturally sensitive mascot as we speak. But yay, go Lane Tech! My journey in education actually started as with me as an undergraduate career advisor, and then I transitioned to high school career advising, where I remember telling one of my colleagues, "Oh my goodness, I just wish I could spend more time with them. I'm doing more paperwork than I'm actually spending time with them." And at the time, they said, "So, it would be really cool if there was like a whole profession where you could actually get paid to hang out with students and teach them things all day." And I'm like, "Oh yeah, let's do that." And so I went and got my certification in business education and started teaching, among other courses, web design. And so when I applied to teach with Chicago Public Schools, one of the principals that I would eventually work for said, "Hey, computer science. We need a computer science teacher. It says here that you teach web design." I'm like, "Yeah, not the same thing, but if you're offering me the role, I'll take it. Absolutely." And I did, and it has been the journey of a lifetime. Loving
Wow.
every moment. Well, you can't say loving every moment, but I'm loving most of the moments of the experience and the journey so far.
Amen.
Well, welcome both of you, and we're looking forward to hearing more about your work and your thoughts on, current issues. But I think we'd also like to hear a little bit more about what it's like to work in school systems like Atlanta Public Schools and like Chicago Public Schools. So, Cherry, why don't you start us off with that question? What is the school system like, and what have your experiences been?
Since I began working as a CPS teacher back in 2016, I think is the year. I've worked in a number of different schools. 2015 is when I started. So I've been in 4 different schools, and my experiences at each of those 4 schools has been vastly different. I've worked at Sullivan High School, which is actually located in the heart of Rogers Park, which is the most racially, culturally, ethnically diverse neighborhood in the city of Chicago. Actually was in the school building the morning that we came, the morning after the presidential election, in a school building where I was working with undocumented students and with students whose family members were newly immigrated to our country, and it was as many emotions as could be experienced in those moments. Absolutely, yes, all of them were there, including teachers who had voted for Trump the day before for him to win that election. So that completely shocked my world in terms of what I thought education was and what I've since known education to be. In the other schools that I've worked in, obviously being a Black woman, my experiences have been, no pun intended, but colored by many of the experiences that I've had. Is my identity has played a big role in how I've been perceived in those spaces, the level of autonomy that I'm permitted to exercise in those spaces, and even to where I am now, the level of safety and vulnerability and protection that I feel that I'm able to experience in my role as a teacher, in addition to in my identity as a Black woman. CPS, as I've come to understand it, being a student of educational policy study, operates largely on a business model. And so when you have conversations with administrators, with chief network officials, with school officials in general being mindful of the kind of discrepancy between the priorities of the classroom and the priority of the business. You have to be very aware of your audience in those conversations. Yeah, so I have come to understand the role of my administrators as the edge of where education becomes business. And I've noticed that there's a great deal of tension that our administrators in those roles have to endure and have to face and have to tackle due to the political nature of the business side of it, of our schooling system, and due to the conflicting priorities of teachers in our classrooms. I hope that's as transparent as you need me to be, because I'm there.
No, thank you for
Absolutely.
sharing that. Those are, those are your real experiences.
Yeah.
So thank you for sharing that. LaShawn, I'd like for you to also share, your experiences in Atlanta Public Schools as well, and also, maybe talk to us a little bit about what's happening now. How are you able to stay safe? How has COVID-19 impacted the way Atlanta Public Schools is having to operate at this point?
I'll have to co-sign and echo a lot of things that Charity talked about with respect to the business side of education that a lot of times we as teachers kind of underestimate in making decisions, or that administrators, superintendents, the board, how they make decisions on students' behalf, right? But I have to really kind of applaud from Mayor Keisha, my mayor, just saying, Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms, I like to call her my mayor, from Mayor Keisha all the way down to the principals, really have made a concerted effort and decision to go fully virtual. Now, there's an upside and a downside. Okay, the upside is you have built-in security and safety in the sense that you're not unknowingly exposing students to COVID. Let's just be honest, right? I've experienced, parents sending their kids to school knowing that they were ill, deathly ill almost. Like, and you saying, being that teacher, I see that you're sick, just go put your head down in the back of the classroom. In this season, that could mean that you've infected everyone that you've come in contact with. So I applaud their decision to do that. Downside is for younger students, not so much the older students. Older students, while they miss the interaction, I think that because they're more digital natives, they're used to kind of interacting in FaceTime and they have the technology in their hand. It's not as big a deal for them. But for the younger kids, I do see, being that I'm a mom of 6, I probably should say that so that the the world at large can understand. I'm a mom of 6. I have 4 school-aged children, and I can see for my 6th grader and my 4th grader that it kind of affects them a little bit differently because they don't have that interaction with their classmates, and some things are lost in translation with teachers, with their own teachers that they might have been able to grasp if they were in the class. However, I have to applaud the district's decision to take at least the first 9 weeks and see what's happening with the numbers before they just throw us into the classroom. Now, why is that vitally important? Our high schools, as I'm sure Charity also can echo, my high school has 2,100 students. That was the last count. We have 11 floors. We have over 200 faculty. We have over 100 staff. How do you socially distance that many people? How? Most of the elementary schools, traditional elementary, I'm not talking about charter schools. My students, I'm going to plug a charter school real quick. In Desi School, which I think is awesome, they have a 1-to-8 ratio. And they have a 2-to-16 ratio in the classroom, which means every teacher really only has to come in contact with 16 other people, period, for the day. However, what about those elementary schools where there's literally 35 kids in there? Okay, and then that teacher has to then go do duty. That teacher has to then go interact because there are no specials, or the teachers run the specials. So you've got the 35 kids that they interacted with, and then maybe other 30, 40, 50, 60. And let's spring back around to the fact that parents, they're in a situation where they don't really have a choice sometimes, have to send kids to school. Or they know that someone has tested positive for COVID and don't want to say anything. They can't quarantine because they have to work. So I think Atlanta Public Schools, regardless of some of the things that I may not like that they've engaged in, or maybe the decisions that they make, I think that they're making an extremely good decision to go fully virtual, and they've made every step possible to support that decision. Students have technology. They have access to Wi-Fi hotspots free of charge or based on their income. They're providing meals. So they're doing a good job. Is it great? Is it perfect? Of course not. But they're doing compared to other districts and how other districts are doing it, even nationwide, I'd say APS is really doing a good job. They really are.
Yeah, and I think, given the data that has been provided, in each state in terms of spread in the communities is very important, because I understand that that was a big factor in deciding to go virtual, because the spread in the community was so high that they did not want to, expose staff, teachers, and students to the virus. So you make a good point in having made it was a tough decision. These are tough decisions to be
Yes.
making. These are affecting families for sure. But keeping everyone safe, I think was their priority. So kudos to them for doing that. Charity, I wanted to ask you about the you mentioned how Chicago Public Schools operates almost like, because it's so big, they operate almost like it's its own business. It's a huge corporate type of organization almost. So tell me a little bit about what you see maybe that's not working, but also share things that you see that are working. I think it being such a large school, there are lots to learn from. So share with us a little bit about both.
Absolutely. So first, I would not just attribute the use of a business model as kind of the driving philosophy of CPS, not just because of its size, but also because we don't have an elected school board. Our superintendent of our schools is our mayor, and our Board of Education members are appointed by our mayor. So that in and of itself kind of lends itself more to the side of business than for the people, if you will, since we don't actually have a right as Chicago citizens to elect who our board members are. So that's one observation. Yeah. So that makes a difference. Makes a big difference to have our mayor to be able to make as many decisions on behalf of our schools as we do, in addition to many of our Board of Education members who haven't stepped foot inside of a school since they themselves were students. Makes a big difference. But in the things that CPS is doing well, and the lessons that we're learning as teachers right now, revolves around a lot of the similar things that Lashon just mentioned, is that we are also exclusively digital. There's no other way that could have been done safely. We have a student population of 300,000 students, 20,000 teachers. In my building alone, we have about 4,300 students. And given the nature of high school students, if we just think back to some of the activities that we engaged in as high school students, there's a reason why Mono does the same thing that it does now as it did when I was in high school 20 years ago. It's socially distancing is not going to be a thing. So yes, and especially even as you get to the elementary school classrooms, it was like, oh, you have a Batman mask, I have a Spider-Man mask, let's trade, right? Isn't that kind of the nature of the students that we're dealing with? Y'all know how kids behave. There's no way that we can keep 300,000 students safe in this environment. So yes, CPS made the right decision, made the right call to make sure that that school would be exclusively take place in a remote learning environment. I do want to give a shout out to the Chicago Teachers Union for ensuring that would happen. We said, hey, let's take a vote and see if we're going to strike. CPS said, no, that won't be necessary. Just everybody stay home. Let's not do anything drastic. Calm that down. Just it's okay. We'll make it work. And so now we're looking at potentially opening the doors to our school buildings in November. in the middle of flu season. We'll see how that happens, but we'll just say that that is what's on the table for now. The lessons that we're learning as teachers, again, due to the nature of our city and the not just the racial segregation that takes place, but also CPS. Our city has been redlined for the entire duration of my life, my parents' lives, my grandparents' lives. It is the way it is. The north side of the city belongs to the white folks. Black people live on the south side. You got Mexicans that stay over east, the Puerto Ricans that are now starting to be broken up into neighborhoods that they used to be in, but now Pilsen, Humboldt Park, all these others are actually starting to now be gentrified, aka we're going to boost the prices and push y'all out. But these are practices that have been happening for decades upon decades, and the impact that we see that has on our students is quite tangible. So again, go back to the experiences that I had when I was, for example, a teacher at Kenwood Academy on the south side of Chicago. At that time, if we had a transition to remote learning, I know for a fact that there will be students that I will not hear from for weeks at a time because of the nature of where my students live, the access to the resources that they had according to where they lived. It's not a possibility. We still have zip codes in the city of Chicago that still do not have access to a stable internet connection just because of where they live. So regardless of whether we give them a mobile hotspot, regardless of whether we give them some type of access to the internet Wi-Fi box, regardless of what device we give them because of where they are and because of the access that they have to the internet by nature of the internet service providers that provide internet service to those areas, they're still at a disadvantage. And so as teachers, the number one thing that we have learned to do in this season is to be flexible. If we can't do anything else, there are a lot of things that we have to acknowledge are beyond the scope and the realm of our control. But that right now, I have got to say is our superpower. I mean, in what other profession do you tell people, hey, I don't care what knowledge you already have of the internet. I don't even care if you know how to turn a computer on. You're going to teach students through the internet, and you kindergarten teachers are going to have to do it too. So the kids that can't sit still in front of your face are now expected to sit still in front of your face of a computer. I don't know how that works. But like all of the things that we're being asked to do and to mobilize so quickly, where else are you seeing this happen?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And of course, given just the variegated nature of the experiences that we have across the nation as teachers now, we still have some teachers that are physically reporting to the classroom to do both teaching face-to-face and teaching virtually to students in the same moment.
Amen.
Yeah.
We are extraordinary.
Yes, you are. Yes, you are.
Yes, no other profession can do what we do and still have to deal with the negative press and the media and the teachers are lazy. No, they don't even work summers. Like 2 months is not a summer, people. Come on now. But like we know this
and
is
it's not even 2 months. It's not even 2 months.
It's not even 2 months because how much are we still lesson planning for the following school year?
No, I mean, a lot of this is we are truly learning as we go, right? As a system, as an education system in America, we are truly learning as we go. And, you know, we've seen that in some places they've been able to operationalize virtual learning much better than in other places. And you know what that turns out to be? It turns out to be that the more well-resourced communities with well-resourced schools are able to cope much better than than in other places where they're not well resourced, and that to me is again another impact of this pandemic. But also we've lived with these systems for so long that it's like, it's like normal. It's like been normalized, and now, we're talking a lot more about it. But I want to ask you, what do you think we need to do as a, teaching community, as a CS Ed community, as educators that we're trying to voice, our concerns and these issues. What ideas do you have about, what can be done to manage these huge disparities?
Well, I want to kind of jump on that question first. One of the things that I've noted, okay, so in teaching in Atlanta Public Schools, I landed in North Atlanta, but I began at Frederick Douglass High School. Okay, it was erected in 1968. I know that because my grandmother taught there, my father went there, my aunts went there, my cousins went there. I wanted to go there. Had I not lived in Lynn, Massachusetts, I would have gone there. They produced some artists. They've produced people have gone into industry. The man who created the Super Soaker, he went to Douglass. So from athletes to academics, they've produced this. Somewhere around 2007, 2008, and this is recorded and I'm unfiltered. That's just who I am. When it became very clear that the Falcons wanted a new stadium, there were some very specific things that began to happen in that neighborhood. Okay. We went from having just Douglass in that particular neighborhood to two gender specific high schools. A historical high school is maybe 3 miles away from us. And then you have another high school that's maybe another 4 or 5 miles away from us. So within this one district, where we used to have, like North Atlanta, 2,000, 2,100 students, every year it's kind of dropped off. And one year I looked around and I said, oh, they want this to be the alternative school of the West Side. My grandmother had taught there from 1968 until 19. She said, why are you saying that? I said, any school where the testing season starts in March. Yes, we all know this. We're in education. The testing season starts in March. Any school who will allow students to register in their school in March, because now the numbers are going to count, right? And you're not really gatekeeping. You're not saying, and this is some people are going to think this is unrealistic. Well, where's your, really gatekeeping, finding out where that student should be in school or why they're coming to school so late and not being a true gatekeeper. You're changing the temperament. You're changing the standard of the school. So it went from a place when I started teaching there in 2007, we had 1,700 students strong. When I left, we had 700. Why? The solution is in the money. So let's speak meat and potatoes. The reality is where that neighborhood is, where it sits right now, is so strategically valuable to downtown Atlanta that it's beneficial to change the neighborhood. So what started happening? People were buying up whole swaths of neighborhoods and just boarding up the houses, paying the taxes, and making sure that they didn't get a blighting penalty or fine. Okay? The neighborhood, and then you change the feel or the sentiment of the neighborhood. So drive everything down. So I call that the precursor to gentrification. To me, that's the true precursor. Let's fast forward this because I don't want to take too much time on that particular aspect. What I am seeing as a solution is to stop ignoring the actual issues that are happening. Stop ignoring it. The reality is that neighborhoods are changing either by default or design. In those changes, we have to acknowledge. By design. Yes. And it's usually by design. The only reason why I add the default is there are instances where, there are ebbs and flows and there are cycles in neighborhoods that occur and happen. But usually, to your point, it's by design. And then maybe 4 or 5 years before that, there was this thing that came out called the Emerald Corridor. And so the Emerald Corridor, lo and behold, happens to be maybe 3 miles away from the stadium. Okay? And then I noticed, and I had to audibly laugh, when they redrew the lines for Atlanta Public Schools, how big, I was at Douglass, remember, how big North Atlanta's district became all of a sudden. In all 5 iterations of the map, North Atlanta's district did not change, not one bit. But what changed from the original map to the map that they proposed was one road, Bolton Road. If you were on this side of Bolton Road, you went to Douglas, and it became smaller. If you were on this side of the road, then you went to North Atlanta. The other side used to be Douglas's district, right? Okay. So now what you begin to put out to the community at large is that this neighborhood doesn't matter anymore. Okay? And then people begin to think, well, I want to be in that district where those things are happening. I want to be over in that school. Well, Douglas used to be that school. So until we start addressing that just because you redrew some lines, just because you shifted the district here and there, you gerrymandered, let's just be honest, you educationally gerrymandered, maybe we'll copyright that somewhere. Just because you did that doesn't mean that there aren't students in that district who can handle the content. Here's the reality of the flow of how it's gone in America. It used to be that if you could read and read well, you could go to college. Too many students who didn't look like those who held the reins of power were gaining access. They changed the rules. Then it became you had to do math in general well and read. Enter standardized tests. Too many students who didn't look like the reins of power gained access. We got to change the rules. Then it became you have to pre-cal or calculus to enter the good schools, right? I posit to you now, if students don't have a grasp, I'm not saying they have to know it perfectly, a grasp of computer science and coding in general, they're going to be left behind. Why? Because everything is being automated in some way, shape, or form. And this day and age is about analytics. I don't know one company that's worth its weight in salt that hasn't researched the analytics of a product before they put it on market.
Yeah.
Why is there sequel? So you want a solution? Stop looking at particular neighborhoods as they can't do. And then actually mobilize and incentivize the teachers who are actually there with something that's tangible. We all know what that tangibility is. To groom these students in a way, in a manner that they can come back and pour into their own neighborhoods and not just flee north or south or wherever it's better. And then they look and see their own neighborhoods differently.
Yeah. Well, I see Charity also nodding her head in agreement. And to your point, Lashon, the notion that computing knowledge or computing skills, can help students advance is a good point, because you are right. We are becoming such a technologically advanced society. And for our minoritized populations, if they don't have access and opportunity and ways to succeed in computing, they are going to become even more marginalized in modern day America, and also globally. I believe this is why we do what we do, because we believe that that's not right. And I wanted to give Charity an opportunity to chime in on how do you think policies in districts, perhaps at the district level or at the school level, how technology and computing education can help advance our education system in general. Do you have any, with your background, understanding pathways into not just the workforce, but to making connections with other discipline areas? How do you see computing education and technology having a significant role in moving our education system forward?
A loaded question, but I will do what I can. First,
we were having an audio. Okay.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. So, the Conversations about policy at the district level can make a tremendous impact on the knowledge that students have, not just about computer science content, but around their identity formation as seeing themselves as someone who computer science can belong to. Someone that computer science can be effectively utilized by, and as someone who can internalize an identity of, I am a computer scientist. I've seen at our school district, as much as I will gripe and complain about stuff the CPS ain't doing right, CPS has made the Exploring Computer Science curriculum a graduation requirement for every single student in the district. That makes a difference. Not just because the ECS curriculum is so amazing. Shout out to Dr. Joanna Good and Gail Chapman, the authors of the ECS curriculum. I love you both. You're amazing. And I still have not been able to review the recording that they had when they were here with Jean Rue on their Voices interview, but it's coming. I've saved it and I got you. I'm coming. Yes, the ECS curriculum is wonderful, is amazing. And I think that if a district wants to make a graduation requirement around any curriculum, they should start with ECS. One, because it is an introductory level curriculum, but not just because of the actual CS content, but because it's one of very few curricular and programming efforts that I've seen that is actually grounded in equity, and that is a pervasive theme throughout the entire curriculum from Unit 1 to the end of Unit 6.
Yeah.
It was designed with the intention of broadening participation among traditionally underrepresented students in computing. It is accessible and it's engaging. It's culturally relevant, like all of the things that we want to see in the curriculum that we're utilizing in our classrooms, that we're implementing in our classrooms. That's exactly what it is. And at the district level, ensuring that students have that knowledge or at least have the exposure is everything. Because I've had conversations with students at the beginning of the school year versus at the end where I ask, what do you think about computer science? What are your feelings about computer science? What do you know about computer science? And I've never heard a student come the end of the school year say, I don't want to do computer science because I don't know what it is. That is not an acceptable answer for me, because you've learned what it is. I don't want to do computer science because it's too hard. Nope, because we did it and we did it successfully. I don't want to do computer science because I don't belong there.
Right.
That one I'm still challenged with, because if I Google a computer scientist right now, none of them look like me.
Well,
which is why the ECS curriculum is so imperative, not just, to every student, but particularly to those who identify with the recognition of a computer scientist, of a programmer, of a gamer being a white male. That is inherently problematic. And districts can make a positive and impactful difference in the lives of our students of color. Given the fact that even now here in the state of Illinois, 52% of our students identify as students of color, and only 14% of our teachers identify as people of color. How in the world are we supposed to address computer science education in our diversifying classrooms if we're not approaching them with curriculum that's actually relevant to their identities as humans, not just as students, and we don't have ethnically relevant role models to facilitate the curriculum? That's a whole other issue, but I'm going to bring it in there too, because that's another policy that districts need to be implemented. Recruiting and retaining teachers of color makes a big difference, right? Not just right now, but it's not just for our students of color either. Our white students need to see what Black competence looks like, says Gloria Ladson-Billings. Everybody needs to know this is what it looks like to have a teacher in a computer science education classroom who knows their stuff and loves you.
Yes, absolutely.
Right?
Well said, Terry. I am.
Yes.
I am so glad that you mentioned the CPS policy in terms of having to have computer science as a graduation requirement, because that is so forward thinking and has really set a high bar for other districts around the country to examine. And it has essentially prioritized computer science, as an integral part of a student's educational trajectory. That because computer science is important for society in general, that, they'll have an opportunity to study computer science. And we're talking all of CPS. And through exploring computer science was the right way and the best way to do it. So kudos to you and the entire team for helping to make that happen there. And I also want to say too that even though Atlanta Public Schools is only a fraction of the size, as I said earlier, of Chicago Public Schools, I think the proportion of teachers of color is so very important too. And I have to say, and Lashon can chime in here too, I have to say that so far there's been a pretty good representation of teachers of color. I'm not saying it's enough, and I'm not saying it's good enough, but it's only in certain schools, because there are 10 high schools in Atlanta Public Schools, and there are only 3 that have any white students. And so in those schools, you do not see, sort of the more balanced teachers of color. So Lashon, I'd like for you to maybe chime in on your thoughts about the importance of teachers of color in general, but also for students to not just see that you're teaching computer science, but to also know that the curriculum and how to integrate culturally relevant pedagogy is important.
Well, let me tell you all a story that happened to me literally 2 weeks ago. I received an email from a parent, a father, and the parent began, "Mr. Myles, such and such student will have to check out early from your class because we're going to our lake house a little early." Totally fine with that. I believe you should live your life. I believe you should live life fully, and class will be here when you get back. To which I responded, "Hello, Mr. So-and-so. Thank you so much for informing me. But I also would like to inform you that my pronouns are," and then I identify as, and once again, thank you so much for emailing, and I have not received an email back, but there's the problem. This parent, now mind you, when you email me, when you look on me in the district website, my picture is there. For anyone who's lived in America for longer than a little bit, Lashon is not a male name, although we do have LaShawn McCoy, who is a football player. Lashon is not a male name in general, okay? Now, we live in times where it doesn't matter how genderized you want to make my name. But if you're speaking traditionally, it's not a male name. This parent automatically assumed my son is taking AP Computer Science Principles. It's an AP class. It's a computer science class. It must be a man. And I thought to myself, oh, Lord, wait until he finds out I'm a black female. Oh, my goodness. He's probably going to, lose his mind. And then I said, okay, when I first got the email, I was like, how do I handle it? Do I not say anything? And I said, no, I'm going to say something. Because I want you to know that your child has a black female teacher, number one, and that you automatically assume. Now, this is not the first week of school, so we're 4 weeks in. So you think enough of me as his teacher to inform me that you're going to your lake house. So it means in your eyes I must be a good teacher, but you automatically assume that I was male. So let's get down to it. And I've said it before. Until we have adequate representation in our classrooms, and I'm talking about Black, Asian, Hispanic, and other until we have adequate representation in our classrooms across the board for computer science or antithetical, you know, representation in these classrooms, we are effectively shutting a door on certain students. We just are. Because we have inherent biases. We do. If you are a white male who has been in a white male dominated industry, I don't care how you got to computer science or teaching computer science, you have, unless you have adequately addressed your inherent biases, you are going to automatically kind of cultivate a certain type of thinker, a certain type of movement, a certain type of student. You are going to identify with students who look, act, think just like you, if you're not actively addressing your own inherent biases. I, even as a teacher, as a Black female teacher, have to make sure that I'm inclusive when I'm asking questions, because I'll find myself inherently kind of asking my Black students a little bit more questions than my white students, because I want to keep them involved, keep them involved. Well, is that really what teaching is about? No, it's to spread the wealth of asking of questions and putting people on the spot, if you will, or fostering that type of learning where they can learn that, they don't have to have it all together. But if we do not actively get out of our own heads, and I'm talking about those administrators who are hiring these teachers, because that's really where it begins. If you as an administrator are not actively looking to diversify your staff, you're doing your students a disservice. If you as an administrator are telling your counseling staff that the criteria for a student to get into computer science, AP or a pathway, for instance, we have a pathway at North Atlanta that I'm actively fighting for because I want to bring validity to computer science and I want students to leave from this building with some marketable skills. But if you as a counselor are only taking the top 10%, what happened when that student was in 6th grade? I believe, this is just my personal belief, high school starts in 6th grade. Why? Those are your foundational math and ELA skills. Yes, you had to get through elementary school, etc. But from my perspective, that's like the reset button from elementary school. High school begins at 6th grade. You tell me, when do the numbers of young ladies stop liking math begin? When does that begin? 6th and 7th grade. When do the numbers begin? When African American Black students, I don't care what kind of Black you are, Black diaspora from everywhere, when does it begin? They begin to think that they are less than in any academic field. They thought they were smart coming out of elementary school, and they were. And then all of a sudden they get to middle school, hormones come into play, right? And then you become a behavior problem. You ever think that maybe your classroom is boring? And you become behind. So until we start our hiring practices, and I put that squarely on the administration because I don't really have any say, I can make suggestions. Until our hiring practices change, people start really addressing their inherent biases, and they recognize and realizing that in computer science, you just have to be a logical thinker.
So, I think you make a lot of great points there, the hiring practices, but also within the staff that exists too, addressing the biases that exist and having those conversations, are truly important. I know Charity's like agreeing all the way. So thank you for sharing those thoughts. I would like to shift these conversations towards another issue, and that is the increased racial violence that has surfaced. I'm not saying that it hasn't happened all along, because it has, but just, because it's 2020, these racial injustices that our nation has experienced, particularly within the last year, but really, like I said, for hundreds of years, the killings of, here in Georgia, Ahmaud Arbery, jogging in his neighborhood. We've all seen video on the knee on George Floyd's neck, and so many more, so many others. I'd like to hear from you as Black females in our nation, teachers, educators, mothers, sisters, aunts, cousins, how have you been able to cope through these dark times? And what are some things you have done to get through it all? Because we know that this transfers to our kids. And so I think it's important to share what you've done to be able to cope through these times, provide some recommendations or suggestions for teachers all around the country who have also experienced these extreme emotions from these injustices. And I'm getting teary-eyed as well, too.
You're making me cry.
But I think it's important to lift your voices in this matter. So, with that, Charity, would you kick us off on that one?
Yes, I'm holding back tears. Sure. Hoping is such a loaded way to describe how Black women are expected to navigate challenges in our society. We have the burden of both hypervisibility and invisibility at the same time, that we are expected to be the proverbial strong Black woman at the same time that we are assumed to be angry Black women, at the same time that we are often the first to be invited to the table because our faces represent what our faces represent, but we're also the first voices to be ignored when it comes time to speak at those tables. We are, when it comes to just understanding the nature of intersectionality, as Kimberly Crenshaw describes it, as having neither of the privileges that are seemingly associated with being a man, a Black man, and the privileges that are associated with being a white woman. There's so many things that we have to navigate, but we cope because we have to. At the end of the day, it is just the inherent nature of what it seems that Black women do and what Black women represent. If we don't do it, it ain't gonna get done. Problem is, that also means that when it comes to our own quality of life, our life expectancies, our mortality rates are all affected in so many compounding ways, not just by the systemic racism that we experience, but also the burdens that we carry throughout the trajectory of our lives. And so it is more important now than I think it ever has been that we have to engage in self-care. Self-care is no longer optional. I don't think it ever was, but I think this year has shown us, has just kind of put a spotlight on it, that self-care is not optional. Coping, however, should not be the only option. I do not feel that coping is the way for us to describe the way that we are to continue carrying and enduring and persisting and being the heart of all of the movements that we're seeing. Me Too started with a Black woman.
Amen. Black
Lives Matter started with Black women.
Yes,
I Am Too on Harvard's campus was started with a biracial Black Japanese woman. We are at the heart. We are the heart beating pulse of so many movements and so many changes and the social revolutions that we're seeing occur in our society. They started with Black women. But at the same time as we are starting, as we are initiating, as we are trailblazing, as we are pioneering, we still do need to take time to sit down and rest and know that it is safe for us to rest and it is okay for us to rest. That is the challenge that I think we're finding right now, is that I don't know how many safe spaces we have as Black women. I don't even know if we can even, the challenge is identifying where those safe spaces are, I have told close friends of mine that prior to Trump being elected, I could go anywhere in the city of Chicago and have a good time. Now that I know where I'm not wanted, I've identified a whole lot more spaces where my identity is not welcome. I'm not going to eat pizza on 35th and Union or 35th and Low when I know that that area of town is now hostile to my identity. Not just mine, but I've seen how my friends who identify as Chinese American have been treated in those areas, right on the brink between Bridgeport and Chinatown. With the emergence of the pandemic and Chinese Americans being targeted and assaulted because of their alleged perceived connection to the origination of the virus. And so, yeah, as Black women, I feel like it's hard. I'm sorry, go ahead, Lynn.
No, with the words China flu and Kung flu, that has definitely elevated, hate crimes against Asian Americans in the United States.
Not just reinforcing it, but empowering the words and the hatred behind all of those messages, for sure. Yes. And so now we have the challenge of even trying to figure out, well, where am I safe? Where can I be vulnerable? Where can I rest? Some of our homes are no longer safe. So yeah, I am grateful in one regard because I rather know, like I don't think I could have been a Black woman on the north side or in any side of Chicago back in the 60s when migration was first happening. And it's like, well, so we're back in the 40s technically, but when in the South, racism was overt.
You still good, remember there were two.
Yeah. There were two phases, right? Exactly right. So there were two, so basically two separate kind of patterns of migrations or shifts that happened during that time. It was like, at that time, it was like, yeah, in the South, you know that you hate it there. And then in the North, it's like, you kind of got a question. I'm not so sure that I have to ask questions now. I can readily identify. There are certain symbols. There are certain, of course, Confederate flag will always trigger me. That just, it is what it is. Trump are now triggering to me. Blue Lives Matter t-shirts are now triggering to me. I've identified certain symbols and certain patterns of behavior that are now alerting to me as a Black woman, and I've identified those as being threatening or targeted toward me, and I've recognized those as unsafe spaces. And so in the challenge that I find to reach out and to identify safe spaces, I also have to be cognizant of what triggers and what objects, what symbols, what people, what ideologies I have to actively avoid. We can't engage in every fight. We have to pick and choose our battles, because if we are to continue moving the social revolution forward, that does mean that we have to treasure and cherish and hoard our energy and reserve our energies for the battles that are worth fighting.
Well said, Charity. And there's also something about strength in numbers and finding people that have, a common shared experience, common values, and that are truly, respecting of people of all colors. And, I think we need more of that. So thank you for sharing your thoughts on that. Lashon, I was going to ask you, our series is called Voices for a reason. It's voices of innovative and compassionate experts in society. And we absolutely loved, lifting your voice and Charity's voice in this episode. But I'd like to know who's been an inspiring voice for you, recently, given your role as a leader in your school, as a leader in computer science education. It doesn't have to be CS related, but just wondering, who's been an inspiring voice for you?
Well, I wanted to say one thing, that Charity, I would be remiss and I would kick myself if I didn't say it. Two things based on what she said, and I think we have to address. One, the Trump flag is the new Confederate flag. It's the acceptable flag to fly when you agree with certain concepts. And that's
Yeah.
a symbol for me. And two, just going to be very controversial. The black female teacher is the modern day mammy to some people. Okay. What's the problem with that? A lot, first of all. But what is the mammy? The mammy was the person who stood in the kitchen and really raised the master's children, to be honest. The kids wouldn't dress them and make sure everything. So what's wrong with that? Exactly what Charity said. It is way too much pressure for one person to be on all the time. And until we really acknowledge those things as Black women, right? And kind of, I like to echo someone who's my role model, reclaim our time. We're always going to find ourselves running ragged. So let's bring it to who my role models are. First and foremost, like, I'm a woman of faith. And anytime I find myself feeling drained, feeling lost, feeling overwhelmed, I turn to God. 100%. I'm just being honest. I have a daily practice. I get up between 4 and 5 in the morning every single day, and I pray. And I'm like, what we gonna do today, Lord? And it seems so cliche, but that's number one. Outside of that, in my family alone, we have so many strong Black women who failure for me, not pressure. I don't feel pressure. Failure for me is not an option because of the pathway that has been laid. When I was told the story, it's going to, close your ears, it's a little graphic. When I was told the story that my grandmother gave herself an abortion because she told her abusive husband at the time, I will never have another child by you. Okay, looked at dead in the eye. She found out she was pregnant. She gave herself an abortion, almost died. What type of mental fortitude do you have to say, I'm going to make good on my promise? This speaks to all of the other access issues that she did not have. But she knew one thing. She knew it wasn't going to happen. On the other side of my family, I have a great-grandmother who endured watching her husband's outside children come to their store and buy food. Okay? We have a very distinct look on both sides of my family. You know who a Long is, you know who a Berry is, we just look a certain way. She did not necessarily, she should have divorced them, I'm just going to be honest, but she didn't. She said, the 5 children we do have, you're responsible for sending all of them to college, period. You're paying for every last one of them to go to college. They will not take out a loan. The baby of that particular family is now president of a college in Michigan. So when I think about when I start getting a little down or, oh, my life is so hard right now, wait a minute. You literally know I knew these women. This isn't some story about my great-great-great who, escaped slavery. No, ma'am. These are women I knew. These are women I talked to. I could touch them, feel them, hug them. To know that they had a different type of fortitude. They had a focus. Come hell or high water, these children that I have will experience something different. If I have to suffer and sacrifice a little bit, so you will do what you need to do, it's like standing, I am, the dream of my ancestors. The great grandmother who had to endure seeing the outside children come to her store. She used to call me the brave little girl. Never understood why. But then someone years later explained to me, you are what she wished she could have been. She still was a teacher. She went to college in a time when you weren't supposed to. So she was a nurse. So all of these things, she owned her own home. All of these things that Black people weren't supposed to do, she did. So these are the role models that I don't have to look outside of my family, although I could name a million. The women in my family alone remind me every time I start to feel down or start to feel like, oh, it's just too hard. No, it's not. Because someone endured something way harder than you ever will have to experience. So you could experience buying your own home, being able to choose where your children go to school, being able to have a computer, buy a computer. drive wherever you want to drive all over the country, or recognize the safe spaces and not so safe spaces, but still be able to move in the not so safe spaces and double dog dare someone to mess with you. So there it is, yeah.
I I think that's amazing, Lashon. Thank you for sharing that part of you, which I think is it's more than amazing. I think that to be able to look within your own family for that kind of strength and fortitude that you've described is a blessing. And I think turning to faith is an absolute great thing to be able to do. And to rely on your ancestry for that as well too is just, wow, what a blessing. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you for listening.
I want to thank both of you. You are two phenomenal teachers for sharing your firsthand experiences in, what you're facing in your schools, in your own personal realities, in this time of COVID and political turbulence. Because in all the years that I have been eligible to vote, I believe that this election is like no other. And for me, there is no other option but to vote one way so as to eliminate what is currently happening in our country right now. Because it has emboldened, like you said, the Confederate flag triggers you. It definitely triggers me, but it has emboldened more than that. It has emboldened, some to really cause such great divides in our country that so many of your ancestors, Lashon, your ancestors, Charity, and mine as well too, that fought against so that we could have the lives that we have now. And I owe it to them. Like I said, we've lost some great icons as well too. And I believe that that torch has been handed down to us, and we must, carry that fight ourselves in our nation. Anyway, Lashon and Charity, again, we owe you an infinite amount of gratitude for everything that you do, for taking care of the future of our country, our kids. And your voices have just inspired me and will inspire many, many others. Thank you both so much. Yes.
Thank you so much, Lynn.
Thank you for having me.
Very much. It's been a
Charity, you're
beautiful.
awesome.